Get that started. Okay. So, real quick, we're going to talk about workplace violence today in the new California Senate bill. Uh, it's called SB553, has the requirement that plans be implemented and that there be a process in place to report instances of workplace violence, concerns, threats, et cetera. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. As Julie said, hi, my name is Justin Solano. I'm a lead training consultant for Consortium Training and Consulting. If you all have your phones available, I would strongly recommend just taking a snap photo of that, or at least writing my email or phone number down. Any questions at all, anything regarding public safety, do not hesitate to reach out. We would like to be a resource for you all. A little bit about myself. Prior to working at CTC, I was a police officer for 21 years at San Jose State University Police Department. I was a patrol officer, training officer, a patrol sergeant, detective, sergeant in charge of the detectives, and then eventually uh, a commander that was in charge of the whole patrol division and the investigations division, and eventually the admin bureau, which is where I did a lot of safety presentations, which brings me to what I am currently doing today. So please don't hesitate in reaching out. All right. So just a quick little warning. This is a Zoom presentation over PowerPoint, and anytime those two combinations are together or even solo, mayhem always has a possibility of jumping in. So if that happens, just please be patient with me. If you get kicked off, go ahead and sign back in, and we'll go ahead and get you readmitted. If something happens with my connection, just be patient if you don't mind, and I'll get it fixed and sign back in, and we'll go ahead and continue where we had previously left off. Okay. Really, the only course rules that I have are participation. I really like participation, so I'm just not staring at my computer screen here. Now, we're going to have a couple different ways to participate. The most basic way, which I don't mind at all, is just coming off mute and asking a question. Okay. Those of you, or a lot of people like to raise their hand in Zoom. That's fine. But there's nothing wrong with just coming off mute and saying, "Excuse me, I have a question." I'd much rather field that question right there than run the risk of not getting it answered by the end of the class. I'm also going to run a program called Slido, which will give you the opportunity to participate and at the end ask questions using your smartphone. It'll put it right up on my screen. It is anonymous, but everyone can see it. You just can't see who sent it. Once you scan that, just leave it open on your phone and it'll automatically progress through the next questions. Okay, so for those of you that didn't complete the attendance form in the chat, here's a chance to go ahead and scan it using your QR code. And Julie, you tell me how long you want me to keep this up for before we push on. Remember, you already have the link, so you can also do it retroactively, so we don't have to wait here until everyone is done. It's up to you.
Let's go ahead and leave that up for a minute or two.
Okay.
Just so that everybody in the room, if they're in a room together, they can get that code.
Okay, we're at 80 participants, Julie. That's pretty good. I think you might get all your
Hopefully.
10 months in.
It looks like some people are signing in individually at school sites, so that's okay.
Oh, okay. Well, that works too. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and push on if you're okay with that,
Yep,
Julie.
good.
All righty. All right, so course handouts. I'm not gonna stay too long on this. Everyone that was able to see the calendar invite, it's there, and you can download it there as well. Julie also has a copy. It's not one that you need for the class. In fact, we'd prefer you just download it after the class. It's an outline of the class. It does have information in it, but the information is not going to make a lot of sense until you've had the class. So Just make sure you download it from the calendar and keep it for your reference. And again, I'd much rather have you engage in the class rather than staring at an outline. Okay, so phone's ready, and that's going to be for our Slido program. Real quick, I just want to draw your attention. We do not do presentations like this. You're not going to see slides like that. We use what's called imagery-based PowerPoint, and you're going to see slides with like large font words on it. What we learned during COVID is we can't have a presentation with a lot of words like this, or even 10, 12 slides, and then us talking for a long time. We need to keep things moving to keep everyone engaged. So there's a lot of slides, a lot of strong images, and the verbiage and content is spread out over numerous slides. Before we begin, I want to draw your attention to our website. When we're done with this class, I would strongly recommend going to our website and hitting resources. It's going to take you to a page that looks like this. Okay. Click after action reports. These are free. What after action reports are is basically a surgical breakdown of pretty much any critical incident that you can think of that happened in this country, from school shootings to 9/11. There's a bunch. And so I'm a big proponent of not only learning from your own mistakes, but if you can learn from someone else's so you don't repeat them, that's even better. So this is a great resources. These reports are basically an aerial view of the incidents. After law enforcement is done with their part, it's really done from an organizational perspective. So you can see what was done right, what needed improvement, and then where the ball was flat out dropped. And again, learn from their mistakes so we don't repeat them. So please, please, please take advantage of this free resource, and go ahead and download a couple copies of ones that are similar in size to your schools, or if you just wanted to download all of them, that's fine too.
Justin, can we hold on for 1 second? I want
Sure.
to make sure that it looks like Central, checking in with Central. Chingpei, are you guys good?
Hold on,
We
I've
are
got.
here.
You're good over there? Thanks, Jerome. Okay, I think we're good to go.
Okay. Okay. So how safe are we? How safe are schools today? Um, I'm not an alarmist. We're not an alarmist company. I'm not here to tell you that the sky is falling. Um, Bottom line is schools are extremely safe to be at in this country. This is a real statistic. I know it's sensationalized quite a bit, and I'm not trying to minimize that at all. But you still have a higher likelihood of being struck by lightning than you are being caught in an active shooter in a school. That is a real statistic. You have higher likelihood of that occurring. Now, with that being said, that is the extreme workplace violence. There's a lot of different gradations in between there. So we can't minimize this, and we need to be aware of all of it. So again, this is still a very important subject, but I'm not an alarmist. I'm not trying to make anybody think the sky is falling, because it is not. All right, so the goals for today's presentation, and we're going to talk about how to get a copy of your workplace violence prevention plan. We're going to talk about the definitions, how the Senate bill actually outlines these definitions. We're going to talk about how to report incidents, concerns, and threats to your employer and law enforcement. All right, and then we're going to talk about actual specific hazards that are specific to workplace violence, which is different than a normal hazard, which is covered under your IIPP or your injury, illness, and prevention plan. Those hazards are different than a workplace violence hazard. But just to get everyone moving, since it's first thing in the morning here, we're gonna go ahead and start with a scenario. So you overhear, let me get Carolyn entered. Okay, so you overhear a phone conversation between a colleague and their spouse or partner. You're aware that the two have a strained relationship, and at times it even becomes volatile. You hear that the partner is threatening to drive to the workplace so they can talk to your colleague in person. Your colleague expresses their intent to prevent that from occurring, and you ask if they're okay. They just reply, yeah, I'm fine. He just gets really jealous. What would you do, if anything at all? Okay, so here's what we do, everyone. Here's the part where you can actually, once you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to a site, and you can just leave that site open on your phone. And as we progress through the presentation, it'll just go to the next question. But to this question specifically, would you get involved and report this incident? All right. And for those that don't have a QR code, if you literally go to slido.com and then put in that number right there, it'll take you to the same place. All right. So how many do we have that have answered? Oops. Sorry. Went a little bit backwards. All right. Okay, we have 153. Okay. Hey, Julie, how many people are actually attending the class? This is really good participation.
We should have close to 400 if everybody is present today.
Okay. All right, I'll let it get to 200. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so here's the deal with this question. This question, I'm sure you've noticed, is pretty vague on the details. That's done intentionally. Um, with this question, we tried to make it so there is no real right answer. We just wanted to cause some discussion. However, with everything that we tried, I do think that there is one that's probably the closest to being wrong, and that's going to be no, it's none of my business. So what this scenario is really spelling out here, it's spelling out like a domestic violence relationship or an abusive relationship. Okay, so if there's an abusive relationship and it's domestic violence, uh, and the abuser shows up at the workplace, what do you all think the chances are no one is getting involved to protect your coworker? I'm going to tell you it's zero. Someone is going to do what they can to help out their friend, their coworker, their subordinate, because it's the right thing to do, and that's really what's going to happen. So when you say it's none of my business, it is everyone's business. There is no way that it's not going to spill over and affect other employees. Now, um, so when you say I wouldn't tell or involve management. What do we all know, or do we know? Do we know what is one of the characteristics of domestic violence relationships? And feel free, someone come off mute, or a lot of people. When you ask the victim side of a domestic violence relationship, do you want to call the police? Do you want to, get their spouse in trouble? What do they say the vast majority of the times? Anybody want to come off mute and let me know what y'all think?
I'm fine.
Yeah, they absolutely don't want anything done. Okay. So when you go up and ask them if they need help, what are they going to say? I am fine. I don't need help. Okay. So now knowing that most of the time that's what they say, it's almost the same as choosing, no, it's none of my business, because you're not going to get the answer from them, or you're not going to get them asking for help a lot of the time. And then, so if we want to involve management, okay, which I think is the best thing to do, because what are some things that we could do to possibly de-escalate, or as I like to say for non-law enforcement folks, what's better than de-escalation is, escalation avoidance. So how can we avoid any type of escalation here? Can we move that colleague or employee offsite maybe someone goes, you know what? I'm taking them down the street to the Starbucks, getting them out of the office. That way, when uh, the abusive, partner or the angry partner shows up and demands to talk to him, you can look at him and be like, she's not here. And that immediately, I don't want to say de-escalate, but he's going to leave if she's really not there. Right. So, and we can't do that, unless we start involving management. And so one other thing that I want to touch on here, I've got 2%. So I'm guessing that that's a couple of people that said that they would call 911. There's nothing wrong with calling 911. It's absolutely okay. Me personally, if I was in this situation, just because the lack of the information that we have, I'm not sure that I would do it in this. I might. But there's other factors that are going to be present. We're going to come back to this at the end. Okay, I want you all to think, in this scenario, what would the catalyst be for you to make the decision to call 911? Like, what would it take for you to be like, okay, I'm calling 911? So think about it, and then we're going to talk. We're going to circle back to that at the end of the course. Okay, so we're going to talk about the history of SB553, and what served as a couple of the like catalyst events that put this bill in motion. First one is the 2021 VTA shooting in San Jose, California. Actually, me and a couple of my officers actually responded to this. This was an employee, a disgruntled employee that returned to or came to his place of work, and he started shooting and targeting his coworkers. So in the after action report, they found out that there were multiple concerning reports to management about the employee's behavior that they thought was concerning. Okay. In addition to that, ones that weren't reported, the after action report showed that there were basically not one employee was surprised that this occurred. Every single one saw it coming because they all had some sort of interaction with them, but they didn't report it. Now, granted, management dropped the ball on the couple that did report it, but there was a whole lot that did not report it. And I just want to kind of throw that out there because 5 people reporting something is going to have a certain effect, right? 25, 30 is going to have a different effect. So we want a way to have everyone to have the ability to report concerning behavior. All right, so the second event is the 2023 Half Moon Bay mushroom farm shootings. This was an act of workplace violence, and it happened actually 2 separate locations. Basically, there was enough time for him to perpetrate, an attack, and this was again a disgruntled employee. It was enough time for him to perpetuate attack at one location and then move to another location and perpetuate another attack. So this kind of segues into what I asked you earlier. What would be your like catalyst or fulcrum to get you to actually like the tipping point for you to be like, okay, I'm calling 911? Well, here's something to consider. The 2021 VTA shooting, do you know how long it took officers to arrive to that? They were there in seconds, okay? Because of where VTA is located, it's pretty much next door to one of the 2 biggest agencies in Santa Clara County at the sheriff's office. So they were able to get there really quick. And it is a mile away from the other biggest in the county, San Jose Police Department. And it was right in the middle of shift change. So there were twice as many cops at both police departments than there normally is because it was shift change. So we're talking in a matter of minutes, they had more cops than they knew what to do with. They had 60. And they got to 60 and they started turning cops away. Like a lot, they started turning a lot of cops away that were trying to get in and help. And they were there within seconds. Conversely, the mushroom farm shootings, There was so much time before law enforcement showed up that he was able to hit a second attack in a second farm, not right next door, but go like a fair distance to another one. And that's because it's a more rural setting. So now I'm going to ask you this. You don't have to answer now. I would like the answers later. Uh, how long would it take from all of your different campuses? How long, what's the response time for the officers to get there? I imagine it's pretty good, but I want you to think about that because that should be a factor that you consider when you're trying to decide whether to call 911 is how long will it take officers to respond? Because if the answer is, well, when the person gets here that's upset with the coworker, even if it's a 2-minute response, how much damage can one person do in 2 minutes? A lot. All right, so back to the mushroom farm. 2 separate incidents. Okay, so what they found, the after action report found that there was a failure to train, protect. They did not have a communications plan to address prior safety concerns. Funnily enough, there was no law requiring a workplace violence plan to be in place. There was no legal requirement at all. But out of all places, this mushroom farm did have a workplace violence program in place. And that program involved showing workplace violence videos. That's typical of like insurance companies and organizations like that to have. Well, the workplace violence video that they showed was in English only, and a lot of their employees were non-English speaking. So even though they were going above and beyond, because there was no requirement for workplace violence program at that time, they got dinged for not basically having it in a language that their employees can understand. I think it's still good and unfortunate that they got dinged for going above and beyond, because if they didn't do anything at all, they wouldn't have gotten dinged on it. But they were somewhat prepared. They just didn't have the videos in more than one language. All right, so who has to comply with SB553 and actually create all of these plans and have these classes like we're having today? It's so broad that it's going to be easier for me to explain who is not required. Okay, and that's going to be any healthcare worker. The healthcare workers already have a requirement to have a workplace violence plan and training, and that's required by OSHA 3342. So if you work in a surgical center, you work in a hospital, obviously, urgent care center, any of those, you're not required to comply with SB 553 because you already have a standard that's being upheld by OSHA. Law enforcement, Department of Corrections, they are also exempt. The reason why they're exempt is they're required to have a workplace violence plan and training and all of that. Their plan is actually incorporated into their policy, but they're required to have training, and that's required by California Peace Officer Standards of Training, POST. So what SB 553 is doing is catching the rest of the state up with law enforcement and healthcare, basically. Now, law enforcement is completely different because when you walk into any of their agencies, there are more people armed than not armed, so they're somewhat better suited to handle like an armed intruder come in. So they don't use it. So SB 553 does not use any language from or from POST, but they stole all of the language from OSHA 3342. If you look at 3342 and SB 553, they are very similar. And then the thing that applies to everyone else who is not law enforcement, Department of Corrections, or healthcare is, does your organization, either public or private, doesn't matter, it applies to both equally, does it have less than 10 employees, and do you meet with the public? If you don't meet with the public and you have less than 10 employees, then you don't have to comply with SB 553. Now, some of this is pretty broad, and that's actually how it says it in the law. It doesn't meet with the public. We asked Cal OSHA, who's going to be the enforcement wing for this law, because doesn't meet with the public. I mean, that's kind of open for interpretation. And they gave us a pretty good analogy, and they described it as comparing it to your home. If FedEx or UPS shows up to deliver a package on your doorstep, they ring the doorbell, knock on the door, whatever they do. If you're not home, they do not then go check your doorknob to see if they can open up your house and set it in your hallway and then leave. They don't. They just leave it on the doorstep because your home is private and it is not open to the public. If your organization, even if you don't have public bathrooms or you don't do any of that, you don't have a like a lobby. If a delivery person walks in and goes, "Hi, Brenda, here's the package for whatever," and walks out, that is considered open to the public. If you allow the public to use your bathrooms, automatic. You are open to the public. So basically what this is it's so broad, it covers literally everybody or all organizations. With some exceptions, and the exceptions being teleworking employees, so working from home, as long as the employee chooses the location. Now, that doesn't relieve responsibility from the employer. They still have to have a plan as long as they have, more than 10 employees, have a lobby and stuff like that. But the employees that work from home are not required to actually have the class and have access to the plan and all that. I say, though, if the rest of the company has to do it, it's really easy just to have them at least know where the plan is and how to report something. Okay. So, based on what we just talked about here, what occupations do you think are required to comply with SB 553? With this one, I believe you can choose more than one. I think I have it set up that way. Okay, which occupations are required to comply? Okay, we're at 222, so I'm going to go and talk about these. Start at the top. Um, Librarian at a public library, absolutely. They are required. Remember, public or private institution, doesn't matter. They are required. Counselor at a private university, same thing. Private university, they are still required. They have to have a program for SB 553 as well. And counselor at a private university is going to be the same. Wait, did these just switch spots? I feel like I just read that one. Yeah. Um, yeah. Counselor. Yeah, counselor at a private university, same thing. They're required to. Records administrator at a prison. They do not. Okay. A prison is the Department of Corrections, DOC, and their standards are covered by POST, California Peace Officer Standards and Training. They have different requirements than us because of the fact that they have weapons, number one, and then also the type of clientele that they deal with is different than everybody else. Police officer recruit. Remember, police officers are actually required to have a plan or program under post again, same thing. Uh, so they're exempt from SB 553 most of the time. I will say this, though, there are exceptions to that one because if they are still a recruit, some departments have them actually employed by a different part of the city until they complete the academy. Still, though, I don't think they're running them through SB 553 because they're in the academy learning the whole time. As soon as they graduate the academy, now they're covered. Now, as soon as they get sworn in, now they're covered under post. But that is a little bit of a tricky one. The X-ray technician at a surgery center. Remember, anything surgery center, anything healthcare, they are required to have a plan under OSHA 3342. So they're exempt from SB 553 as well. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about some of the components. And real quick, the entire law is written out um, in California Labor Code 6401.9. It is a very short read. It reads weird. It reads like a penal code. So if you went and read it before today, there's going to be some things that, if nothing else, would be confusing, or you might misinterpret it. After today's class, you go read it, it'll make sense because we're going to talk about what a lot of that is. It's not a long read. I would recommend just going and giving it a quick read. All right, so anytime you hear the word the division while you're reading the law, they're talking about Cal OSHA. Cal OSHA is going to be the enforcement wing of, or the enforcement part of this law. Here's a little fun fact about Cal OSHA. Cal OSHA has never done enforcement before. They do inspections and write reports. They don't do enforcement. So they weren't asked when this law was created, hey, are you interested in being the enforcement wing? They're not real happy about it because they don't know how to do it. Actually, they're probably learning how at this point, but when it was first passed back in September of 2023, and then went live in January, they had no idea. And they're still working out how to do a lot of this. Um, they're not hiding in the bushes because they wouldn't know what to do if when they jumped out of the bushes and caught someone in violation. They're still figuring it out. The law has now given them until December 31st, 2025 to basically come up with standards in areas that take some sort of interpretation, or you look at it and it's really unclear with what the law means. They have until December 31st, 2025 to say this is what it means, or this is how we interpret it. There's several areas that we actually disagree with their take on them. We actually got to ask them because, Cal OSHA is not healthcare and not law enforcement, so therefore they are not exempt. SB 553 actually applies to them too, so we helped them write one of their plans for one of their offices and gave them basically the same class that we're giving you. And we use that as an opportunity to learn more about how they interpret stuff. All right. So anytime California, or any legislative body for that matter, anytime they create a law, there's always a mechanism built in there to record information. They want data. They want data to be able to say our law's working, or this is how we're applying this law. They want data. So that's a big part of of how it's going to affect you, is the recording of this data, recording this information. So this law has broken workplace violence into 4 types, 1 through 4. And every time an investigation is done on workplace violence, at the end of that, you have to categorize it or it has to be categorized 1 through 4. All of you don't, your site coordinator or program administrator will, but we're going to go over the 4 types regardless. And we're going to talk about it. So as I read one definition, please come off mute and tell me who you think fits in that definition. Try to stay in the definition because there's a good chance if you're going out of it, you're mentioning someone that will be covered under a different workplace violence type. So type 1 means workplace violence committed by a person who has no legitimate business at the worksite, and it includes, so it's 2 separate people here, and includes violent acts by anyone who enters the workplace or approaches workers with the intent to commit a crime. So let's go back to this first definition. Who's this? Who's going to commit an act of violence and has no legitimate business at the work site or at your school? Who is this? Who's a good example of this? Someone come off mute and talk to me.
A passerby.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. A passerby, a random person. It could be an unhoused person that passed through the school. It could be someone that lives down the street that is experiencing a mental health crisis. It could be someone that just has no legitimate business there. What about this one? By someone who enters the workplace and approaches employees with the intent to commit a crime. All right, so let's say Gloria is driving into work. Okay, and she drives up and she sees, Deirdre's car. It's clearly Deirdre's car. She knows who Deirdre is. She knows her car. Okay, but then there's someone that is clearly not Deirdre trying to get inside of Deirdre's car. Okay, so someone's trying to break into Deirdre's car. So Gloria Parks starts walking into work, but goes, "Hey, what are you doing? That's not your car." And the person trying to do this turns around, looks at one way, which is running into the school, and he's like, "Well, I'm not running that way because I'm going to get caught." Turns around and decides to run right through Gloria and pushes Gloria on the ground as he runs away. Gloria doesn't get hurt, but she gets pushed on the ground. That's going to be workplace violence. And that person entered the workplace with the intent to commit a crime. His intention was to break into a car. Okay, and that's a crime. His intention was to commit burglary. Okay, he didn't complete it, but it is still going to be workplace violence, the push of Gloria. Now, if he completed it, well, then you have two different things. You have burglary and then you have workplace violence. And you have to deal with the burglary. Well, you also have battery. So you're going to have both of those anyway. So you got to deal with the criminal aspect of it also by calling law enforcement. But when all that's said and done, you're also going to have to document it as workplace violence. All right. So type 2 violence is workplace violence directed at employees by customers, clients, patients, students, inmates, or visitors. So here's the deal. This was not made specifically for schools. They didn't ask any stakeholders. So they put students in here because they knew it was going to apply to schools, but they didn't converse and talk to schools. So obviously students is pretty on the nose. Who else is going to fit into this category?
Would past students fit into this?
Yes, they could. Absolutely. Because past students could be considered visitors. So that's a really good question here. Can someone be in more than one category? Absolutely. So they could be one and two. Like if we're talking about a past student that's like, let's say, hey, you ask them not to come back. They've got no legitimate reason to be here, but they're also, a past student. They could fit in more than one category. Who else is going to fit in this category?
We also have in the chat, somebody said parents.
Yeah, parents. That's the big one here. Yeah, parents. Absolutely. Thank you, Julie. So parents, okay, so Cal OSHA sees them here, so do we. We see them fitting in a couple different spots here. We see them as clients and customers. Okay, so the way they see it is they're entrusting you with the safety and education of the children, so they're going to see them falling in the customers or clients area. Yeah, absolutely, parents. Do you guys have volunteers for like different events? Let me check the chat, see if anyone's answering. Do you
Yes.
have volunteers at
Yes,
any
we
of your
do.
schools?
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. They are going to fall under this one as well. I should just leave this chat open on my screen so I can see it. All right. Okay, and then the second part of type 2 violence isn't actually written in the law, okay, but we do need to address it or talk about it. Incidents involving students with special needs will be recorded as type 2 violence, whether the act of violence was intentional or not. Okay, so this, again, they didn't ask stakeholders. They didn't go to schools and ask before they, just to solicit information. They didn't ask anybody. This is us and organizations like us going to Cal OSHA and say, hey, where do, individuals with special needs fit in here? This is one of the areas where we hope Cal OSHA will give a better directive than what they originally said. And we hope that happens by December of 2025 because that's when the deadline is. But as of right now, whether there's intent or not, any incident, Cal OSHA sees that as type 2 violence. We think that's a terrible take on it. And again, we hope it changes, but until then, it's not really up to us. It's up to Cal OSHA. So we have to record that as type 2 violence. And again, that's not going to change anything for any of you. Just whenever, because all all incidents have to be documented. As you document them and push them through, it means that the site coordinators, program administrator will then take that documentation and then they will record it and categorize it. So again, it's not going to change anything for you, but it's still we still disagree with the fact that they want it categorized like that. All right.
Justin, I want to just step in right here.
Yeah.
You know, just with the workplace violence prevention plan, we have a responsibility to mitigate the adverse effects. But when it comes to impacts from students, we have established processes and trainings in response to student acts. We, many of you know, we work to provide safety care training, which focuses on student behavior de-escalation, as well as keeping our employees safe. But I just wanted to point out that we're committed to providing these trainings and mitigating all of these effects.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, kind of piggybacking on that, everything that we're going to talk about today is when it affects or is targeted at an employee. Student to student does not kick in workplace violence. That's something different. You guys already have processes and procedures for that. In addition to everything that Julie said, this is in addition to that. It's not taking the place of it or anything that. It's about recording the information and also having it in one spot. And again, it is specific to when it affects a staff member or it's targeted at a staff member. All right. So type 3 violence is going to be workplace violence against an employee by a person, or I'm sorry, by a present or former employee, supervisor, or manager. So I think this one is pretty obvious, so I'm not going to ask for examples for this one. But this is going to be our two catalyst events. The 2021 rail yard shooting and then the actual mushroom farm shooting. Both of them are type 3 violence. This is, I'm going to age myself, but this is where the term going postal comes from. All right. And the type 4 violence is violence committed in the workplace by a person who does not work there, but has or is known to have a personal relationship with an employee. Okay, besides the really obvious one, which is a spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, partner. Besides that, who else could fit into this category?
Delivery person?
A delivery person is going to be in type 2.
Oh.
Oops, going the wrong way. Type 2, because type 2 is going to be visitors, right? So there's type 2 visitors. That's a delivery person. So type 4, the key is relationship. There you go. Other family members, friends, relatives, children. Yeah. So a delivery person is going to be type 2. Other family members, yeah, relatives, children. Yep, all these. Question from the group: can we define special needs in type 2? Well, special needs isn't defined within the law, so I think that would be up to the way the district and schools define special needs. Hope that answers the question, because again, they didn't take stakeholders' opinions. They didn't reach out to anyone. The intent of the law is very good, but the rollout of the law, they were a little bit sloppy with it. It'll get better over time, but they just hastily rolled it out. Okay, so anybody else we think can fit in type 4? So I think type 4, I think a good one to show how expansive type 4 is going to be is even landlord tenant. Okay, landlord tenant is still a relationship. So if a landlord feels that he or she is getting gypped or not getting the full rent, and they show up in the workplace, that's still a relation. That's a personal relationship outside of the workplace that's been brought in. That's the key, is non-work relationship. and then bringing it in. So I'm seeing former employee, former student. Those are two different things. So if we go to former employee, that's going to fit in type 3. Going the wrong way here. Type 3, right here, workplace violence against an employee by a present or former employee. So that's type 3. Former student, okay, I think would be type 2, unless the student has a relationship with, and I don't mean romantic, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, a relationship with an employee. If they're friendly, they formed a friendship, they keep in contact because they want to know, maybe someone at the school wants to know how the former student is doing in college. Well, then that would be a relationship. And then, yes, former student would fall in this category. Does that make sense? But if the student basically just ghosted the whole school, didn't speak to, didn't keep any contact with anyone, no relationship, then they come back and commit violence, that's going to be more likely a type 2 or even a type 1, really. Here's the key, though, too, when your program administrators and site coordinators actually designate whatever incident they're looking at with a category. If Cal OSHA looks at the report and they disagree with it, they've said they're not going to penalize someone for using the wrong category. They're just going to be like, well, we see it as this category, and then change it. So we just have to do the best we can, and then be able to articulate why we believe it's that type. All right, moving on. Okay, so back to what we hope Cal OSHA will change. They have animal attacks, bites will be documented as workplace violence. We saw this, that they took it, that they see it this way, and we basically were like, that makes no sense. A random poodle running up and biting an employee's ankle is not workplace violence. We just don't see it that way. Cal OSHA does see it that way, but we don't. So we're hoping that they change that there, because it's not really enforceable. We actually got into a little bit of discussion with them. We're like, all right, fine. Well, look, if two employees are arguing and one has a dog and they get mad, and then the one with the dog sends his dog after the other employee, yeah, absolutely, that's workplace violence, because the dog was essentially used as a weapon. Okay, but the random poodle that I just described, that's not workplace violence. That's going to be something that falls under your injury, illness, or prevention plan. We got in the argument with them. They're like, all right, someone gets stung by a bee. And I'm not kidding. Cal OSHA goes, well, this says attack and bite, not stung. And we're like, okay, the bee bites you. And they literally said, it says animal, that's a bug or an insect. And we're like, okay, this is getting a little bit ridiculous in their logic here. So we actually are hoping that by 2025, that directive and standard will change. But until then, until we hear, animal bites, attacks will be documented as workplace violence. Really, it just sounds like they got it out for dogs, is what it is. Okay, so the requirements that each organization must create a written workplace violence plan. The plan can be a standalone plan, or it can be added or part of your injury, illness, and prevention plan. Belmont-Redwood Shores has decided to create a separate plan from their IIPP, which we think is the right thing to do. They both have different requirements and laws, or requirements of it per the law. Workplace violence prevention plans are governed under 64.1.9. Your injury, illness, and prevention plans are 64.1.7, and they have different requirements. Okay, so they have different training requirements. If you combine them, anytime you do something in your injury, illness, and prevention plan, it's going to trigger requirements of your workplace violence plan, which there's more requirements. So it doesn't make any sense to combine these two. You're going to create more work. So they have opted to keep them separate, which we think is the right decision. Okay. So the law says the plan must be easily accessible to all employees, unions at all times. Must identify either by name, title, or both, your program administrator, which has the overall authority and responsibility over the whole plan and program. And there must be active involvement from union representatives and employees hold on, and employees in the development of the plan and then the implementation of the plan. So we see that as two different things. They're two different acts, basically. And then must have procedures for employees to report incidents both internally and externally. And it must also include threats and concerns. Okay, so I'm just going to pause a little bit to give everyone a moment. Also fix my chat. All right. All right, it must actually outline the reporting procedure, and it must include a statement that employees are free from retaliation, free from reprisal when they make a report. Okay, the idea is the law wants employees to feel comfortable reporting something and not feel like they're going to get punished, maybe if it's about a supervisor or something like that. It must have procedures on how the employer is going to correct whatever is reported, whether it be hazard, when a hazard is reported, how they're going to correct that, or at least the process. And it will outline and include periodic inspections, which will be when the plan is first established and after each incident of workplace violence. And then anytime a new hazard of workplace violence or a workplace violence hazard is identified. The plan is going to be reviewed again annually. And anytime there's a deficiency that's identified in the plan or becomes apparent after an incident. So this is an important part here. The plan must address how or what the methods of compliance are. So what that means is that's talking discipline. This is what the law requires. So when you read your plan, I want you all to recognize and realize this isn't Belmont-Redwood Shores trying to scare you that they're putting in disciplinary procedures should this plan not be followed. The law actually requires that this section be in there. So that's what that is. When you see it in the plan, that's why it's in there. Okay, the plan will detail procedures for responding to emergencies, and realistically, what it's going to do is it's going to basically reference where your site safety plans are, like what to follow those. Okay, this is not going to have a step by same with your discipline. It's not going to be a step-by-step of discipline. It's going to say, hey, it's going to, in compliance with your CBA, and then, in compliance with your, campus site safety plans. Okay. So where can you get a copy of your workplace violence prevention plan? All right, it's going to be available to you at your individual campus or school's internal drives, because each campus has a different, unique plan, that's unique to them. It's got a whole lot of the same information in it, but your site coordinators are going to be different. And your program administrators, Director of Human Resources and Administrative Services, Julie Eastburn. There is her email. I'm sure you all know how to contact her. So how can you participate in the development of the plan? You had staff engagement surveys. You can always, from this point forward, provide input during staff meetings, and then you'll have the opportunity. This is the implementation part. Went a little ahead there. Let me go back. You'll have the opportunity to review the draft of the plan, make comments, suggest changes. Doesn't mean that they're going to it'll all be considered, but that is how you're going to participate in the implementation of the plan. So other ways that you can participate is always by contacting your program administrator and actually being active in it. When you notice a workplace violence hazard, tell someone. And for those of you that I said we're going to go over what a workplace violence hazard is. Just real quick, if an injury, illness, or I'm sorry, if a regular hazard is a wet hallway that you could potentially slip and fall on, well, a workplace violence hazard isn't something that you're going to trip and fall on. It's basically creating optimal conditions for a predator to prey on a victim. So a good example of that would be a parking lot that doesn't have enough lighting. Okay, you don't notice it during the day because you go out and it's got plenty of lighting. Okay, but maybe one night you work late. Okay, and you walk out to your parking lot and you realize, wow, it is really, really dark here. And there's people riding their bikes around. There's people around here that aren't here during the day. And I do not feel safe. Like I feel like someone is waiting to, try to take something, take my car, attack me, whatever. That is an example of a workplace violence hazard. Okay. And you're going to report that. And obviously the solution would be, hey, let's get more lighting in this parking lot or something like that. And then obviously anytime at staff or department meetings, okay, you can bring up these concerns there as well. All right. So now we're going to get into some definitions. All right. So whenever they create these laws, they always provide definitions for words that we already know. If I was to ask all of you, all 400 of you, what your definition of emergency is, and then I compared it with my own, it would be a little bit different, but it would essentially say the same thing. Well, they created their own definition, so I am just going to tell you what it says. How they define it. They say it means an unanticipated circumstance that can be life-threatening or pose a risk of significant injuries to employees or other persons. And when they say other persons, they're still talking about and how it relates to employees. Everything is employees. So what about this definition do you find unique, or would you have found maybe not included in your own definition? You can go ahead and just type out, I don't need a paragraph or like a dissertation. If you just want to put a word in there or two that you feel is unique, that'll work. Or if you just want to come off mute, that's actually quicker. Okay. Anybody want to be brave and tell me who typed employee? Just come off mute and say it was me. If you're brave. This first one at the bottom here. Come on, someone come off mute and say, I wrote employee. Employee or other. Anyone want to take credit for that one and say it was me? Okay. So, chat, is the word unanticipated? No, it is not. There's a lot of people that say that one, and I always kind of come back with, if we could anticipate it, would it be an emergency? So let's finish up talking about this, and then we can absolutely take a quick bathroom break, okay? So we'll just finish up on this one here. I'm gonna go back as you guys continue to okay, before we okay. So I'm gonna just take one part out, and you tell me if you think that this is an emergency. It means unanticipated circumstance that can be life-threatening or pose a risk of significant injury. Full stop. Is that still an emergency? Yes, it is. That's by every definition, law enforcement, whatever. It is an emergency. Okay. I have something about to happen or something happening right now, which it can be life-threatening to anybody, and it poses a risk of significant injury to anybody. That's an emergency by law enforcement, by fire. I mean, that's what a fire is. A building on fire. Okay. It's not just the structural damage that we're worried about. We're now looking at like, hey, there could be people at risk in the area. Okay. It can be very life-threatening if they're in the building, right? That's an emergency. However, if we could anticipate it, like, hey, we're gonna do a controlled demo of this house, of this building, because we're gonna build something over it. Well, now it's anticipated, right? We can clear everyone out. We can do all the safety precautions. It's no longer an emergency. It's just a process. Okay, so when I go back and ask, this was the first person that wrote employee. I asked to be brave. You got it right. That is what is unique about this definition, and what you wouldn't include, what I wouldn't include until I learned about this law. because an emergency is an emergency. It's not specific to an employee. According to SB553, it is. And what that means is if something happens off campus 2 miles away, okay, SB553 is not going to consider that, meaning you don't have to document it a certain way. That same exact incident happens on your campus. Now you got to document it, okay, because now it's considered an exactly who the last person said employee can be an emergency anyone. Okay, guys, let's take a quick Julie, how much time should we take here? 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's try to be back in about 5 minutes. I know that some staffs have larger number of people, but hopefully we can make it quick.
Yeah, I do want to respect everyone's time. If we go a few minutes over, I am fine with it. It's just about your time. So
Yeah, we have a pretty tight schedule
yeah,
today.
that's what I figured.
It's back to back, so appreciate everybody coming back as soon as possible.
Okay. Send me a timer for 5 minutes. Okay, I'll be back in about 5 minutes, Julie.
Sounds good.
So whoever said would love to have the definition up while analyzing, that is a great idea. And I'm sorry, uh, it won't be in your class, but from after we're done with this class, I'm going to put that in the question so it can actually be read as your answer. That's a really good idea. Should have done that. Had a whole lot of classes with this up, and no one's ever suggested that. But I got a class later today, and they'll get it. So thank you, whoever wrote that. Okay, about a minute left and we'll get started. Yeah, so an official definition of the word emergency, uh, it includes precise criteria, likely urgency, scope of impact, legal thresholds, and objective standards. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and that's why they have provided a definition in the scope of workplace violence. All righty. Julia, are we ready to go?
Yeah, people are getting back to their seats.
Okay. All right. Does this every time. Time I move my chat box, it goes full screen. Okay. Oh, we're still typing here too. Any threat? Yeah. Okay. All right. So now we're going to move on to the next definition. Oops, went a little ahead of myself here. Okay, unlawful violence. All right. Um, before we actually get into unlawful violence, is there such a thing as lawful violence? What do you guys think? Since that was a good time, we just had a break, so this will get everyone kind of, interactive. Um, so yes, I've got 71% so far, 72 saying yes, there's such thing as lawful violence, and 26% saying no, huh? All right. All right, so we're at 70. Let's get up to 100 before we actually push this page on. Get a couple more people answering here. So 88% is climbing. There's such a thing as lawful violence. I think the no is starting to stagnate a little bit. It started off pretty high, but now it's getting lower as more people are answering. Yeah, it's dropping. Okay, and I'm gonna throw down uh Nancy, because you wrote self-defense in the chat box, and I think that clicked in everyone's mind that goes, yep, absolutely. There's such a thing as lawful violence if you have to defend yourself. So you are absolutely correct. There is such a thing as lawful violence, the big one being self-defense. I mean, obviously. Um, but there are others as well. Okay. And what I mean by, or some other examples would be sports. All right. If you have, just in the context of SB553, if you have one coach demonstrating on another coach how to hit properly for football, um, that's violence. I mean, for anyone that's coached football, uh, football is a violent sport. So is wrestling. Uh, if you have some sort of hockey, same thing. Okay, there's actual techniques on how to check, how to hit. All that's demonstrated by a coach. And if it's from one employee to another employee, yeah, that's going to be lawful violence. And the reason why I bring that example up specifically is if one coach all of a sudden has beef with another coach, he can't turn around and say 6 months ago, he hit me because he tackled me and it hurt. that would not then be workplace violence. Outside of the context of football and coaching, if he just randomly ran up and Terry Tated someone, well, yeah, that's going to be workplace violence. But in the context of football, meaning it is lawful violence, that he can't turn around and then accuse him of workplace violence. The very clear one, though, is what Nancy had said, and there's a lot of people that have parroted it since then, is self-defense. So when we actually go to the way that that SB553 defines unlawful violence, it's any assault or battery or stalking as prohibited by California Penal Code Section 646.9. And it shall not include lawful acts of self-defense or defenses or the defense of others. Okay, so now you'll notice SB553 gives definitions for a lot of things. It does not give definitions for battery, stalking, or assault. It's telling you that it's gonna send you to the penal code for these definitions. So really quickly here, what do you guys think assault is? This is always a fun one. All right, let's try to get it to 100 here. Often paired with pepper. I got some brave folks. Good job. All right, so you guys go ahead and keep putting in. I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna go to the next one because I think if I start talking about this one right away, it'll give away the answer. No, we're gonna talk about it. Let me go back. Physical or verbal is what Katie's saying, huh? Someone, okay, so that's what the only thing I got in chat about that one. Okay, so we have 50% here saying an attempt to use force. Well, 49. That is correct. Assault is an attempt, nothing more. Well, it's an attempt coupled with the present ability, okay, or coupled with the present ability, meaning that you can't swing at someone from across the street. That's not going to be an assault. But if you have the present ability, you're close enough, then absolutely that is going to be an assault. Physically harming someone is actually the battery part. Okay, that's the actual physical harming. Assault is the attempt. The reason why I ask everyone to define what assault is it helps everyone remember it. Media, social media, TV, everything, they have absolutely ruined this word. This is an actual legal term with an actual legal definition. And it gets thrown around so much incorrectly that people think that, verbally assaulted is an actual legal thing, and it's not. Okay. They'll hear that assaulting someone is actually physically harming them. It's not, it's the attempt. Okay. Now, if you put the word assault with something else, you're creating a whole new legal term. For instance, sexual assault. Sexual assault is something different than a regular, assault. It's no longer the attempt. But believe it or not, there's still the attempt in there. Okay, that's also somewhat misused. So that's why I bring that part up, is because everyone seems to have a skewed view on it, and that's a good way to get everyone to remember it. So Battery is the actual physical attack. It's the physical violence upon someone. Assault is the attempt coupled with the present ability. Okay. So that's why you hear those two terms used together so often. So and so was, is wanted or was arrested for assault and battery. What that literally means is a punch and a miss, and then a punch and a hit. Something as minor as spitting at somebody but missing, still an assault. Spitting at someone and hitting them, still a battery. The thing that is specific to both of them and needed in both of them is intent. Intent is necessary. Okay. If you don't have intent, then you don't have assault, then you don't have battery. And that's why we take issue with the way this law sees type 2 violence with, individuals with special needs. We think often cases, individuals with special needs don't have the intent. Okay. They don't have the intent to actually physically harm someone. That's not their intent. Okay. And therefore, if this was just looking at it from a legal standard, they wouldn't be arrested. I went to a lot of calls where someone was reporting, getting punched or kicked or basically battered. And then we get there and realize that it's an individual with special needs. Well, there's no intent that we can establish there, right? So, and not to mention, that's not going to be the best course of action to get this individual the help that they need either. But we can't establish the intent, thank goodness. So we actually take them to other resources to try to get them the help they need. Now, I'm not going to go over completely the definition of stalking. I'm just going to really briefly summarize, because stalking is a huge definition. It is the unwanted, unlawful following of an individual coupled with some sort of threat or implied threat. Okay. That last part is somewhat important. Okay. The reason why I say implied is there's a lot of things that someone that's not involved in law enforcement might not see, because it wasn't a straight up, I'm going to do this to you. They don't see that as a threat, but as they're telling what happened to the officer's going to be like, well, okay, that's an implied threat. We're good enough to go. Okay. Conversely, if we're talking about someone threatening me, it has to be very black and white. They threatened to do this to me. Otherwise, it doesn't work criminally as a threat. All right. So now we're going to get into the definition of engineering controls. I guarantee all of you know what this is. You've just never heard it called this. All right. So what engineering controls is, it's an aspect of a built space or device that removes a hazard from a workplace or creates a barrier between the worker and the hazard. All right, so look around your office and see if you can give me some examples of an engineering control. Some of it is, you all know what it is. You've just never heard it called this before. And if you, as you're typing this, I'm going to go ahead and explain where these words come from. Yep. All these are engineering controls, every single one. Okay, this is all from these are Cal OSHA terms. Okay, air conditioning, I think we'd have a hard time doing air conditioning, but everything else, absolutely. So I traffic cones, yeah. Balustrade, yeah. Plastic face. So plastic face guard is gonna not be like an engineering control. That's gonna be PPE. That's gonna be personal protective equipment. It's not like an aspect of the environment. But yeah, all these, yeah, engineering controls. And going back to the air conditioning, just because I don't want you to think I'm dismissing it from an engineer's perspective, like, yeah, but not from the safety perspective of engineering controls in OSHA. It's not a barrier to keep a a danger out. Although I suppose you could say the heat could be danger. Okay. An emergency backpack in each classroom. I think that's going to be more for the equipment stuff than the engineering controls. Okay, so did anybody say this is going pretty, a moat? You are correct. A moat would be an engineering control. Never heard that one before. It's a good one. Uh, yeah, it's Sharps container. Although I still see that as maybe being more PPE, not having control over our room temperature. I don't understand what you mean by that. Gloves, again, that's PPE. Fire alarm is going to be the engineering control. Broken pipes are going to be, no. So engineering control, let's go back to the definitions just so everyone, it's an aspect of a built space or device that removes a hazard from a workplace or creates a barrier between the worker and the hazard. So broken pipes to me would create a hazard, not put a barrier in between. Okay. Equipment guards. Lights. Yes, I think lights are a big one. Gates. Okay, so let's move forward because now we're starting to cameras. That's a good. Okay, so I'm glad someone said cameras. So CCTV cameras. If you can see the cam, like they're not hidden. If you can see the cameras, then someone is so anti-slip flooring. Yes, absolutely. Um, if you can see the cameras, then yes, they absolutely are going to be in engineering control because it's used as a deterrent, right? If you can't see them, then no, it's not. It's going to be a tool, but it's not going to be that fire extinguisher. Okay. Okay, let's move on here. Starting to repeat. Okay. TRO or temporary restraining order. What a TRO is, it's essentially a pretrial injunction. And what that means is it's temporary. Okay, meaning that there's something to do afterwards. So after someone is awarded a TRO, basically TRO is their side of the story, right? It's not the other person's side of the story, it's just their side of the story. So it's very temporary and allows them to go to a court, to a judge, and then petition the court and try to get a longer term solution. So it's a pretrial injunction, and SB553 actually provides a pretty good definition. They define it as, oh, actually, before we define it, let's talk about this, or let's do this one. Who can get a TRO? All right, so as you all are continuing to type here, I'm going to just tell you because everyone's got the same answer anyway. Well, they did. Okay, so really what this is TROs can be obtained by anybody. Okay. Now, obviously, a legal threshold has to be met, but they can be obtained by anybody. Okay. So now moving forward, the definition. TRO is a written instruction that's issued by a court or judge that temporarily protects people from domestic violence, civil harassment, workplace violence, and elder abuse. All right, so yeah, we're moving right along there with that one. Let's go to the next part of this. Okay, threat of violence. So SB553 defines it as means any verbal or written statement included but not limited to text, electronic messages, social media messages, or other online posts, or any behavior or physical conduct that conveys intent or that is reasonably conceived to convey an intent to cause physical harm or to place someone in fear of physical harm and serves no legitimate purpose. Oops, all right, let me go back here. Let's go back to the beginning because that is a lot to unpack. At least the first page is. So, if you read this first stanza here, threat of violence means any verbal or written statement included but not limited to. Okay, so that first part, verbal or written statement, that really covers the rest of this. Okay, text, electronic messages, social media messages are going to be verbal or written statements, unless we're talking about on social media posting a picture that's threatening. With the exception of that, everything else is covered here. Texts, electronic messages, social media messages, other online posts is already covered under verbal or written. So now I'm going to ask people to come off mute, talk to me. Why do you think the authors of this law were so specific and felt it so important to basically duplicate the information in the second stanza by specifying texts, electronic messages, social media messages, or other online posts? Oh, I did not know Redwood Shores and Sandpiper have a semi-moat. That's pretty cool. Anyone want to come off mute or write in the chat why they think this second stanza or why the authors thought this second stanza was so important, even though it's covered under verbal or written statements? Because it happens online now. Yeah, absolutely. How does it specifically affect y'all where you work? It's the slough and redwoods shores.
The kids get bullied this way.
Cyberbullying. Okay, so here's the deal. Your kids, all kids, they have phones. They might not be allowed to bring them to school, or maybe they can, but they have them. Even if they're not allowed, they have them. Okay, as soon as they go home, they have them. Okay, 15 years ago, a kid would have a kind of an outbreak, throw a tantrum, and back then we'd be like, man, this kid's got issues, got a problem. We had no idea that we'd be longing for that to come back, because what that kid is telling us is something is wrong and he needs help. He or she needs help somehow. Something is wrong. They're not doing that anymore. So it goes more than cyberbullying. It's asking for help. Okay. Huge outbreak like that. That's them like telling us they need help. There's something wrong. It's not happening anymore because now they're going on to these social media sites. Now they're going on and they're posting something, some cryptic message. It's not quite a threat. It's concerning, but it's not quite a threat. It's not like it's enough for where a lot of people see it and they're like, well, that's weird, but they don't do anything about it. Okay. And then it sits there and it festers. Okay. And then they're not getting the reaction that they want. And then, as with anything else, that behavior is now going to escalate. That's why they feel it's so important to actually point this stuff out. Because if we can catch it there when it's weird, when it's concerning, maybe we can stop it from escalating to the actual threat. Even though a threat, I mean, I know this sounds weird, but I love threats. Okay. Because threats are very actionable. They're telling you exactly what they're going to do. Tells me everything that I can do. Okay. When it's concerning, when it's weird, it's less actionable, but there's something there. So we have to do something. So from a law enforcement side, there's really not much that we're going to do with that we can legally do with that. From your side, there's a lot you can do with it, because now the name of the game becomes intervention. Okay. If we can intervene now, maybe we can prevent it from ever escalating to the threat, to the incident. Okay. And I'm going to go even further in 2024. It's not just kids, it's full grown adults. How many of you, and feel free to come off mute and tell me if you're not too embarrassed, uh, heard about life-changing, life-altering events from your friends and coworkers that work down the hall from you, maybe even next door, that maybe someone's pregnant, maybe someone's getting married, or maybe they got bad news, like a death in the family, and they're down the hall from you, and you found out on Facebook. Anybody brave enough to come up and own that and say, yeah, that's happened to me, or maybe I've done that? No one in the chat either, huh? I would be willing to bet that someone has experienced that. Okay. So, last two slides here for this definition. They go hand in hand, really. And it's basically to cause or place someone, or to cause physical harm, or to place someone in fear of physical harm. What this is talking about, we talked about the other threats, the written, verbal. Okay, now we're talking about non-verbal, basically non-written threats. Anybody wanna? I don't have anybody's cameras on here. Maybe you can tell me, give me an example of like a non-verbal or not non-verbal, non-written threat. How can a threat can be conveyed, elsewhere or in a different way? Finger guns. Yep. Anything else? Photo or drawing of what? Pretending to cut throat. That's the one I'm looking for. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? So, okay, so all of you work at schools in some capacity. Has anybody ever seen this? Like they're going to punch, but then stop. Hiding under hoodies, that's going to be a tough one to actually. You need more context in that. And the yes to this one. Yeah. Okay, so to the other examples given, um, finger guns and pretending to cut throat. Yeah, there's really good examples. However, context matters, right? Because this, oh, let me let this person in. This, totally different than this. How's it going? So context matters. You need to remember to bring that. Cutting the throat, okay? Context matters. Meaning if two educators are hosting some sort of assembly and there's, kids that are public speakers, or maybe it's an outside public speaker, and they start talking about something that you're like, they should not be talking about this. Looking at one educator, looking at the other one saying, shh, cut the mic, cut the mic, cut the mic. Completely acceptable, right? That's not a threat. So context matters. Anytime you were considering this, bring the context to make it clear. Going back to my example, this one, and I'm still waiting. I haven't gotten a good one yet in all these classes, has no other reason or has no other purpose other than to cause someone to be in fear of physical harm or to place them in fear of physical harm. Even when it's done as a joke, the goal is still to get them to jump. Okay. So, that has no other purpose. Does anyone disagree with that? I can't think of another another purpose. And as you all are thinking about that, typing on that, I'll move to the next one. But if you do come up with it, I'd like to hear it because I challenge every class. I've gotten one that was close, but still not completely. All right. So the law defines it as any act of violence or threat of violence that occurs in a workplace of employment. With that being said, can you experience workplace violence outside of the workplace, in the grocery store? What do you guys think? You're on vacation for 2 months, summertime, and you're in the grocery store. Can you experience workplace violence?
Yes.
Anybody?
Yes, if you run into your coworker there.
Absolutely. Doesn't always have to be a coworker either. It could be a parent. Maybe the parent's upset with you about a grade that you gave their kid. Absolutely, you can. So I love that answer. Yeah, because you're only going to be involved in that confrontation because of your employment. So yes, you can experience it anywhere. And therefore, you have to report that to your supervisor so they can get it documented the right way. All right, workplace violence includes but not limited to. So this is the most important part of this class. So if you all are, doing something else, really watch this part because this is the barometer. This is how you're going to measure every event, okay, and determine whether or not it's workplace violence. So first thing you're going to do is look at it and be like, do I have a threat or do I have a use of physical force against an employee that results in? So that's one. Do I have a threat? Do I have a use of physical force? One of those two. If you have neither of those, you can already stop. It's not workplace violence. It's something else. And it's got to be against an employee. Okay. So threat, physical use of force against an employee. And then does that result in or have a high likelihood of resulting in an injury or psychological trauma or stress? You don't need all of them. You only need one. So going back here, this is the event. Is the event or does the event include a threat, use of physical force? Yes. Let's say I've got a threat. Okay. Someone threatened to do something. Okay. Boom. Does that threat have a high likelihood of resulting in injury? No, it's just a threat at this point. So at the reporting of this incident, no, it did not result in an injury or high likelihood of an injury. Does the threat have a likelihood of psychological trauma, of resulting in psychological trauma or stress? Yes. Well, now we have workplace violence. Does that make sense? Just give me some yeses in the chat so I know everyone is still engaged. All right. Thank you, Joseph. Okay. So conversely, student gets upset when I'm sure none of you have seen this. Student gets upset, picks up a chair and throws it on the ground. Like, I'm sure all of you have seen at some point. Okay. He didn't throw it at you. Okay. But do we have a use of physical force? Absolutely, we do. He picked up a chair and slammed it on the ground. We have a use of physical force. Does it have a high likelihood of resulting in injury? No, because he didn't throw it at you. Okay. Could it be, psychological trauma or stress? Sure. And this is where it becomes objective. Okay. We can all objectively agree on what has a high likelihood of causing physical injury for the most part. Okay, there's always going to be some that's we'll get some people arguing, but for the most part, we can agree what would have a high likelihood of causing an injury. It's completely subjective what would cause psychological trauma or stress. So a lot of that is going to be in the eye of the beholder. Okay, if something gets reported to you, gets reported up the chain, it's going to be in the eyes of that person. If they're like, I'm completely stressed out by this. Or if you have a teacher of 30 years that's basically seen everything, and a kid, in the example I gave, picked up and slammed the chair down, and they're going to, so you got the use of force, sure. But that educator could, look at it like, I've seen this my whole career. No, I'm not stressed about this. He's just, he's a problem. I kicked him out of class for the day. He'll be fine. So no, he wasn't traumatized, and he's saying that he wasn't stressed. Well, then you wouldn't have workplace violence. Even though that same incident for someone else could be workplace violence, for him, that he's saying not traumatized, not psychologically traumatized, not stressed out, then it's not, for him, it's not workplace violence. Is that tracking for everybody? And then when we're talking about what's, high likelihood of causing an injury, all right, so we have a kid that he gets mad and he has a balled up piece of paper and throws it at the teacher, and it hits the whiteboard next to the teacher. We can all agree that yes, that is a use of physical force, but it does not have a high likelihood of resulting in an injury. We could still then say, hey, yeah, it could cause psychological trauma or stress, again, based on what that teacher is saying. Like maybe it's, hey, this isn't the first time that this kid does this every single day. I go home and I'm stressed out. I wake up, I'm psychologically traumatized. Well, then it would be workplace violence. Conversely, same scenario, but now it's not a rolled up piece of paper. It's a closed soda can. Still misses. High likelihood of resulting in injury? Absolutely. That's what I'm talking about when we can objectively all agree on what can and what wouldn't. No, I'm not saying that. So the question is, so do you mean if it doesn't result in an injury, it's not violence? No, in fact, this law is very specific. No injury is required for anything. It is threat or use of physical force. Okay. That has a high likelihood of resulting in injury. And so if it has a high likelihood of resulting in an injury, we don't need psychological trauma or stress. We just need the high likelihood of resulting in an injury. If it does not have a high likelihood of resulting in an injury, then does it have did it cause psychological trauma or stress? If it's a yes, then you have workplace violence. Is that clear? Hold on. What if you are trying to stop a child? Clear. Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, what if you are trying to stop a child from hurting himself, but you end up getting hurt? That is a really, really, really good question. Okay, that is a really good question. One that I've not gotten before, but I'm going to go back. And unfortunately, this is going to I'm going to give you two different answers. Okay, if it is a student with special needs, according to what Cal OSHA, not what the law says. The law doesn't say anything about special needs, just Cal OSHA. If it is a student with special needs, then it's going to be workplace violence type 2. because you obviously have the use of physical force and it resulted in an injury. If it's for any other student, it's going to be a no, because remember, it needs to be assault or battery. Which one of those is assault, or assault, battery, or stalking? Which one of those is assault or battery? It's not, okay? Because they're trying to hurt themselves, and believe it or not, it's not against the law to hurt yourself. So it wouldn't be workplace violence. It would fall under your injury, illness, and prevention plan. Does that make sense? Because there's no intent for that kid, for that child, in hurting you. One of the things that is required is that intent. So going back to assault, battery, stalking, and this is it's legal jargon. Some of you may be familiar. They're mens rea crimes. Okay. And basically, this law requires mens rea crimes. Mens rea means guilty mind, or loosely translates to guilty mind. You need an intent. It's not a crime of negligence, which would be, actus rea, guilty act. Okay. The best example for that, or a good example or good analogy, is someone pushes someone down the stairs, they fall down the stairs and get injured. That's battery. Someone intentionally pushed someone down the stairs and they were injured. Now, conversely, someone having a hand truck backing up with a lot of paper on it and bumping into someone and knocking them down the stairs, same result. Still got injured the same exact way, but one is a crime and one is not, because one had intent and one didn't. So going back to the question there was no intent to hurt the teacher. So it's not going to be workplace violence. It's going to be something that's covered under your injury, illness, and prevention plan. Okay. Now, remember what we said. Someone asked about the injury. You're going to see this in the law several times. They repeat it, regardless of whether the employee sustains an injury. All righty. Now, everything that we went over, and we spent a lot of time, and I do think it's important that we spend time on that. But this is the exception. Anytime a firearm is mentioned, threatened, anything with a firearm, you don't need the psychological trauma, you don't need the likelihood of injury, you don't need any of that. Firearm or dangerous weapon automatically triggers workplace violence and all the requirements that go with it. Use of a common object as a weapon automatically starts it. Now, the difference with common weapons is you need a little bit more than just it's showing up. It needs to be used as a weapon for it to actually trigger this. Some good examples, and I'm just going to say them in your office. You've got staplers, scissors, chairs to throw. I mean, basically everything in your office, books, all those can be used as weapons. For it to automatically trigger workplace violence, they have to be used as weapons. Not the same for a sword or any kind of gun. Just mentioning them in the right context. Obviously, if you're discussing something, in class and it gets mentioned, that's no. But if it's out of place, then yeah, or kind of implied threat, then yeah, it's automatically going to trigger it. All right. Now, work practice controls. All right. I actually forgot to mention one of my favorite engineering controls, because we went through all the examples. You guys had a lot of really good ones, by the way. Remember, the engineering control is an aspect of a built space meant to reduce a hazard or be a barrier in between a hazard and a worker, right? So one of my favorite ones to mention is speed bumps. Okay, speed bumps are a really good example of an engineering control. Its intent is to keep speed to a safe speed. So now we're going to the other side. And remember the example I gave, parking lot, not enough lights. That gets identified as a workplace violence hazard. The solution is lights. Well, those lights are going to be an engineering control. So now, if we have engineering control, which is the physical barrier, now we have work practice controls, which are procedures and rules which are used to effectively reduce workplace violence hazards. This is just the rule. That's all it is, okay? Work practice controls are usually used in conjunction with your engineering controls. So the example that I just gave about the speed bump, what would the work practice control be? If the speed bump is the engineering control, someone type it in the chat or come off mute and tell me what you think the work practice control that would go along with the speed bump. Speed bump is the engineering control. What's the work practice control? Anybody? Slow sign. No, that would still be an engineering control. Remember, work practice control is just the rule. It's the rule. Speed limit. Good job, Michelle. That's what it is. You got the speed limit. Work practice controls the speed limit that says don't go. I'm going to keep talking, but if someone wants to throw in there, did you guys know that all parking lots have speed limits? I've been in a couple classes where I asked the speed limit. Someone's like 25, and I'm like, what? What's the speed limit in your parking lots?
5:15.
Is it posted 15? 5 miles an hour right there. It's 5. 5. It's 5 unless posted otherwise. So no, I'm not saying anybody follows it. Most people don't, but it's 5 miles an hour. Most people do not follow it. Okay, so if work practice controls is the speed limit, so going back to my other analogy, parking lot, not enough lights, too dark, it creates optimum conditions for a predator to prey on a victim. Okay, so it gets reported, and Julie comes out and goes, all right, well, this is dark. She goes out there at night and be like, yeah, I need to put lights here. Okay, unfortunately, it is November, and I have to wait till the start of the next fiscal year to get enough money to install these lights. And I also want to put cameras. Let's do that. I'll put cameras and lights. So those are my engineering controls that I want to put in, but maybe she can't do it until the next fiscal year. So temporarily, she could go, hey, all right, I'm going to implement a work practice control, which is the rule that says, hey, you can't work past this time unless you work in twos. So when you walk out to your car at night, past dark, you're doing it in pairs, therefore reducing the likelihood of something bad happening, right? So that's going to be the rule until lights and cameras get there. So that is a work practice control being used in conjunction with the engineering control. Now, the reason why that gets brought up is these workplace violence incidents, as they're reported, Cal OSHA wants them dealt with using these actual like methods. And when it gets documented, it will say that in it, that this is what was implemented. Okay, workplace violence does not include lawful acts of self-defense or defense of others. Nothing in this law or any other California state law allows that to, or prevents that from happening. All right, so we're gonna start picking it up here. The workplace violence log, okay, it looks like this. After every incident of workplace violence, after the investigation is complete, your site coordinator and your program administrator are going to complete a log that looks like this. Okay, if you'll notice, this is done after the investigation. There is no personally identifying information in it whatsoever, and it is available to all of you upon written request to your program administrator and site coordinators via written request via email within 15 days of your request. However, that 15 days does not start until the investigation is complete. So if the investigation takes 3 weeks to complete, you can then put your request in after it's complete, and then they'll get it to you within 15 days. To get a copy, again, you're going to go to Julie. You can also go to your site coordinator as well. Okay. The way your district is going to communicate regarding workplace safety and security, we are going to conduct trainings as needed. Information is going to be sent out via email, put out in staff meetings, and put out in your campus your employee access specific campus intranet. During emergencies, they're going to utilize your PA systems, your intercoms, their phone calls and text messages, emails. You do have hand-to-hand radios or walkie-talkies, and That's how information is going to be communicated during emergencies. All right, so we're going to go over really quickly. This is a separate class that we do, so I'm going to kind of breeze through this quickly. Um, recognizing some risk factors and indicators of workplace violence. Okay, we're talking about active shooters and pretty severe stuff. So inappropriate displays of anger or intimidation, aggressive relationships. This is a big one that we see now with incels when we're talking about the Isla Vista shooter. This was a big one for him, which led to stalking. Communications that are perceived as threatening. Okay, this one is a kind of a slippery slope because emails and tone, it's difficult to discern. I would always err on the side of caution, even if you're wrong. Threats or probing of workplace by the abusive partner, going back to that first scenario. Okay, they could come and show up, make a scene, and just see how long it takes one of you to call 911 to get the cops there. That's one of the steps in the pathway to violence. Any type of erratic or bizarre behavior by an individual that's caused from mental health, illness, or substance abuse. Okay. Would any of you, and you don't have to answer, report your coworker or friends when they show up to work smelling like booze? If no, I'm not saying that's wrong or right. Would you, if they showed up 2 days in a row or 3 days or for a week? Okay. At some point, you start to have to recognize that there might be something larger going on with this individual. Alarming cyber activity with the elections coming up. I'm not talking about politics. Okay. That is not alarming cyber activity in any way, shape, or form. Okay. I'm talking about someone posting, "I am a supreme gentleman." For those of you that don't know what that means, I just mentioned him earlier, the Isla Vista shooter. That's like his tagline. He has all of these active shooters have followers, and they quote them because they want to be them. So "I am a supreme gentleman" is a tagline made famous by him. And if we see that written in an online post, that's alarming because that means that this kid is likely going on to these fan pages for the Isla Vista shooter. Okay, if we start seeing it in like, in assignments, same thing. I am God. I always mess this up. In German, basically, "I am God" in German. Again, that's going back to the Columbine shooters. Humanity is overrated, or I'm sorry, mankind is overrated. That's again going back to Columbine. That is alarming cyber activity. Okay. Suicidal statements. Suicide, it never just affects the individual that's trying to commit suicide. It affects everyone around them. And if it's your coworker, believe it or not, it happens. It doesn't always happen in the home. Sometimes they plan on doing it at work. Okay. And it will absolutely affect everyone there, especially if they try to do suicide by cop. Okay. Hostile feeling, or anytime that they display or basically make you aware of hostile feelings of injustice or perceived wrongdoing. That's a big tell because they're usually storing this information, keeping it and collecting it. Any observable grievances with obviously plans of retribution should be pretty big. Are they marginalizing themselves? Okay. Do you normally have someone that you go to lunch with like every day, then all of a sudden they stop? Okay. You go the next day, no thanks. Next day, they are increasingly isolating themselves. This is signs and tells that there's something going on in their personal life, which they could possibly bring into the workplace. Changes in work performance. And I don't just mean like dropping the ball once or twice. I'm talking about a pretty obvious thing of like, "I no longer care. I don't care." Well, what that's usually a tell or a sign of is when someone stops caring about something that they previously cared about, they stop caring because they know it's going to end soon. Okay. So that's why we're so concerned about something like that. And they know it's going to end soon because they plan on ending it. Sudden or dramatic changes in home life or personality. More things that can lead to this are financial difficulties, pending or civil litigation. If someone was to get arrested for stalking, DUI, anything like that, it is extremely expensive. So one of these can definitely lead to the other. Okay. It is an absolute myth that individuals just snap. They don't. Okay. It's a long process. All right. So when someone has decided to act violently, there's a whole lot of reasons that they do this, but they typically have these three things in common or believe these three things. Okay, number one, they feel like the act is justified. They've already ruled everything out in their head. This is the only way that I'm going to fix this, that I'm going to prove to everyone else that I'm right, they're wrong. Okay, they've already looked at all different, avenues to a take. They've dismissed all of the other alternatives. There's only one thing in their mind that they can do, and they're willing to pay the price. Okay, the vast majority of the time, they plan on dying there, either by their own hand or forcing first responders to arrive. Okay, so they always have these three things set up. Okay, when we look at the pathway of violence, we want to actually, this is why we actually want to start reporting this stuff as soon as we hear it or see it. Okay. Um, Believe it or not, law enforcement is very good at catching these individuals. You'll never hear about how many law enforcement catches because those ones don't make the news. We catch them typically in pre-attack preparation and probing and breaching. So when they're probing and basically testing the boundaries that they can take, that they can take, that's where we catch them. Okay. When someone does call 911 and we show up, we start questioning them, they give a little bit too much, and we end up getting a warrant to get inside their house. And then we see all the planning and preparation. And we can end it right there and take them to the DA's office. I personally have interrupted 5. We don't know if they were actually going to carry it out, but they were definitely planning on doing it. All right. So this is another way that they get caught. The term called leakage. Okay. Kids that plan these attacks almost always are doing intentional leakage. Okay. They want to get caught and they're just getting ignored, and that's what pushes them over the top. Adults, they don't do it purposely, but essentially what it is, it's communication through a third party where they basically say what their intent is or describe their intent to do harm. All right, so I've blacked out the name, but this is the Parkland shooter. He straight up posted on a completely unrelated video, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." This is what I'm talking about. Okay. This individual was a kid. He was screaming for help. He straight up said, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." Okay. And, unfortunately, federal law enforcement dropped the ball here because it was reported to them. And he did what he said he was going to do. Okay. If you look here, here's a review of a knife. It says, "I haven't stabbed anyone yet, but I'm keeping the dream alive. When I do, it'll be with a quality tool like this." That's just an Amazon review. How many thousands of people do you think read that review and no one reported it? If they just reported it to Amazon, Amazon has a law enforcement division who would then let law enforcement know, and law enforcement would then use this information because Amazon just won't share the personal data with them. They'll share the post with them and say, "Hey, get us a warrant." Law enforcement will come back and say, "Here's your warrant." Then we get the data and then we go talk to this kid. Okay. That did not happen. And this kid became a violent attacker, an active shooter. If you look on the one on the left, it's talking about master locks and how he's got them on shipping containers and how it won't, it's really small. I can't read it on my computer. But it won't stop them, but it'll make them or slow them down until they're too old enough to care. He had 5 people locked in shipping containers. And again, how many people read the review and did nothing with it? If they just reported it to Amazon, Amazon would have got it to law enforcement. So again, this goes back to seeing something weird and not doing anything about it. So according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, occupational sectors that are at most risk are health, social services, trade, catering, public admin, and defense, and then guess who? Education. Again, I'm not the kind of person that says the sky is falling. It's not. You still work in an extremely safe environment, but statistically speaking, you're at higher risk than other professions. Okay. Additional risk factors that are typical, and this is basically at organizations, not yours. You guys actually have it set up really well. Lack of emergency communication, working alone or in small groups, high worker turnover, usually an indicator that you're going to have a type 3 violence, working late at night, again, creating good opportunity, inadequate security, again, good opportunity, poor environmental designs. We already talked about some of that. Long waits for service. That's a good indicator that it's going to be a type 1, right? someone from outside. Okay, how many types of workplace violence are there? Let's see if we can get through this quick. Okay, I'm gonna wait till we get to about 50 here before we go on. All right. Yeah, there are four. There's only four, guys. 1 through 4. Type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. Okay. All right. So I want you all to now from this point forward, be aware of drastic changes in your coworkers or just people you see in their attitude towards others. I want, watch for any escalations in their behavior. And then really we need to get the information to our supervisors, okay? They're the ones that are going to be able to help mitigate some of this risk as long as they're doing what they're supposed to do, which this program set up that way. So what it's going to look like specifically for you for reporting concerns on workplace violence, you should report any behavior perceived as intimidating, threatening, or violent, or even when no actual threat of violent act occurs, as long as it's job related, takes place on school property, or has the potential to be brought to work, or again, you think it'll go off work, but is job related. So obviously you can contact your direct supervisors anytime. You can go directly to your site coordinators, or you can go to your program administrator, but they've actually made it very easy, and there's going to be a form that's located at each campus internal drive where you can click on it, and it's a very short questionnaire that you can just complete. It's just going to be a Google form, and it'll go to site coordinators and program administrators, okay? Quick and easy. Should also be a link to it. I believe it'll be in the plan as well. So if you review the plan, and just a heads up, that same form has the option for you to report it anonymously. So when we're talking about there must be a statement where you're free of reprisal, you have the option to do it anonymously, so they won't even know who reported it. That being said, that does reduce the likelihood of it being able to be, investigated to its fullest potential, because they don't know where to go to ask if they have a question. So it's always going to help if you do identify yourself and put your name, because if they have any questions, they know who to reach out to.
Justin,
Girl. Yeah, we're wrapping it up, Julie.
we have one question, and I
Sure.
think it needs to be addressed. What if type 2 incidents happen daily in the context of a classroom with students with special needs?
So yeah, great question. And I'm sure Julie will be able to answer this or kind of reiterate what I say. But when we're talking type 2, okay, there's already a process that y'all have when something, outside of SB553, you already have that process that you have to do, correct? So there's a way to document, there's forms that you have to complete for
Yes.
every incident anyway.
Yes, on the
Yeah.
student side, yes.
That does not change. What will change with that is now that basically you have to let the site coordinator know, hey, this happened, here's the form. So you complete the form, you don't have to do anything else. You're just making sure that the site coordinator is aware as well. That site coordinator is going to review the form. That's going to be part of the investigation. My understanding is the form's pretty thorough, so that will likely be the whole investigation. Okay, and then they're going to complete that violent incident log at the end of it. So that's what's going to happen. So yes, the process for the individual paraeducator is going to be the same. The site coordinator is then going to tag on that violent incident log at the end of it. Does that make sense?
Yes, I also want just everybody to know that we have been recording these incidents, and the log has been initiated by the site supervisors without somebody having to submit a form. So site supervisors have been filling out the violent incident log for type 2 incidents this year so far. So
Yeah. Again, we disagree with Cal OSHA's take on it, but at the end of the day, it actually doesn't cause any more work for the individual paraeducator. It does cause more work for the site coordinators and program, administrators, but the violent incident log is pretty brief. And then that information is just retained for the required amount of time. Okay. So everyone should know what their communication tools are and what's available and what's working at your site. For instance, if you have like, I don't know, an off-brand cell phone and it doesn't work at your school, know that and then know where the closest phone, is to you that you can get to. You guys have hand-to-hand radios. When's the last time you turned them on and used it and checked them? Okay, know what works. Okay, we have the intercom. We know that that works because that should probably used every day. So just know what works and what is available to you. We should do checks here. So the real quick on this, depending on what type of emergency it is, actually any type, the first 15 minutes is the most crucial, and the outcome of the event will typically nearly always depend or hinge on the actions taken by all of you that are there. Okay. Yes, law enforcement and first responders are going to get there and they're going to do what they're supposed to do, but actions, decisions, or the lack of action, lack of decisions made by personnel that are already there is going to greatly change the outcome of that event. So listen to this class. Keep yourself trained because you will end up having a larger effect on the outcome than actual first responders will do. All right. Notify a supervisor as soon as possible. Make sure we already talked about this. Cell phone, landline, email, call 911. The longer you wait to call 911, the longer it's going to take first responders to get there and mobilize. Now I said this, what is your litmus test? Does anyone want to be brave enough? You can put it in the chat. What would it take for that first scenario? Like, what would it take for you to actually call 911? Just someone give me one answer and we'll move on here so we can actually go in and talk about it. Remember, I asked too, what was the response time? How long does it take for it to get to your individual campus? Witness violence. Okay. Unfortunately, yeah. Okay. So witness violence. Okay. So if we're witnessing violence, okay, we talked about the response time. I imagine it probably takes law enforcement. Your area is a really nice area. It probably takes them 2-3 minutes to respond. Okay. If you've already witnessed violence, that means violence is probably going to continue for that 2 or 3 minutes before law enforcement arrives. Okay. And I'm telling you from someone that's actually experienced it from my side when I'm, having to deal with a suspect that's actively trying to fight me. Okay. And reviewing other tapes where an officer's alone for 5 minutes fighting with an extremely violent person. 3.5 minutes is an extremely long time of a fight. Okay. I mean, you're talking very, very long. So I would think about how long it takes law enforcement to respond and try to make that call a little bit sooner. It's not good. Okay. So in my experience, outside of school hours, police response. Okay. So yeah, outside of school hours, that's actually a really good point to bring up. Okay. So if the response time is not good, we need to be thinking about calling it earlier. Okay. Because 3 minutes is a long time. That's a lot of damage can happen in 3 minutes. Okay. And that's a good response time, by the way. All right. So here's the bottom line. If it popped up in your head at all, should I call 911? That means you should have already called. Okay. As soon as it pops in your mind, I should have already called. Okay. Remember I said, okay, so when you walk into a room, everyone should know their primary way out, secondary way out. If I was teaching this class in person, everyone would typically come in through the same door. Auditoriums usually have 4 doors. I asked the group, if you had to leave right now, where would you go? And they all point to the same door that they came in, even though there's a door right next to them over here. Okay. Walk in, take a minute to scan. I'm not talking about being paranoid, but look at your ways in, look at your ways out. I did this a lot when I was a young officer. I didn't really do it in my civilian life till I had kids. Now I walk around with kids and a wife and I'm not being overly paranoid, but when I walk in, I'm like, that's a way out. That's a way out. Okay. Just know your primary way out and your secondary way out. Okay. When we're talking about, escalation avoidance or de-escalation, De-escalation for me, I don't think it's a fancy word. I mean, law enforcement has done it forever. It's been called a lot of different names. It used to be called verbal judo. It's the same, but we've done it forever. And I think a lot of different professions try to like mirror it, and it doesn't work the same. Law enforcement has a very specific goal. When we're trying to de-escalate a situation, my goal is to get this person to comply with me and allow me to place them in handcuffs. Okay. It's a very specific goal. So I'm trying to de-escalate them to that point. Other times, it is not a specific goal. You're trying to de-escalate someone to get them to settle down. But then you walk away. A few minutes later, they go back up. Okay. The only thing that you could try to do is de-escalate them and convince them to leave. Okay. But again, they're not going anywhere in particular. They almost always come back. Okay. So de-escalation to me doesn't always have the same uses or effects as law enforcement. So I think escalation avoidance is far better, especially in your role. Okay. When you're talking about an angry student or parent that's screaming or whatever, you're just like, I'm not going to talk to you until you're ready to talk to me. And then you walk away. And then eventually they calm down because they want to be heard. Okay. So you don't listen to them until they get to your level. Again, different class. I'm a de-escalation instructor for law enforcement. It's a little different for people or for non-law enforcement. Okay. Know how to communicate, know your reporting mechanisms. And all of your additional services that you may not be familiar with, guaranteed your managers and supervisors know about it, okay? How to access your EAP program, they know how to do that. Okay, I'm going to skip this scenario because we're a little over on time and go to the Q&A portion. All right, so what questions do you all have? Okay, I come off mute, put them in the chat, or you can write them up here on this, and this is the last thing we'll do before we actually close it out and get you all your certificates. So why don't we just skip ahead, and any questions that we have, we can go ahead and put them in the chat rather than the Slido. That way I can get you guys can get started on your certificate. Okay, so here's what it's going to look like after you scan the QR code. All you got to do is first name, last name, email, I agree, and that's it. Okay, so there it is. Go ahead and scan that, and you'll get your certificate for the class. I think I can go ahead and put that in the chat as well.
I just posted the certificate in the chat.
Oh, you did? That makes it so much easier. I was just going to do it for you. But it's easier now that you did it. Okay. You can still see my screen the same way, right, Julie?
Yeah, I see the QR code.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, so there's the course certificate. I'm going to go to the next one. Since the course certificate is in the chat, they can just click it, and it's going to be the instructor feedback. Please let me know what I can improve upon. And again, I'm sorry for having to deal with me being all congested and eyes watering like crazy and stuff. So I appreciate you all's time quite a bit. Yeah, so some of us are getting, it's saying it's not accepting my name. Some of us are getting invalid name. Yeah, so the first time I got this was last class. So just go back into it, and you have a space behind your name. Delete the space, and it'll take it. Yeah, make sure there are no extra spaces. That's exactly correct. So if you go to your last name and hit the space, delete that space and hit submit, it'll work. I don't know if that's something that came with an update because I never got it until the last class I did was like a week ago, week and a half ago. And then all of a sudden I had that happen. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Hey, I have 4 kids, so I really, and they're all junior high or younger. I really appreciate what y'all do. I definitely could not do it. And Julie, that's all I have after after they get their certificate and feedback.
Great.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording now. Okay.
Yep. Thanks, everybody, for attending. If anybody has any problems with the certificate or wants the feedback form, send me an email. I've already gotten, I think, one of you that was unable to do that. I sent a quick little email with the certificate.